Welcome back, everyone. Myself, Elliot Grigg, and my esteemed co-pilot, my co-colleague, my friend Paul Kelly. We are here again for another preview week. As we always like to do, we've got three fights, a couple of world title fights, and I suppose we say a notable undercard fight that we're gonna focus on. We're in two locations. We're in Dubai. We are in the US of A. Without further ado, obviously, I like to obviously ask Paul how he's getting on. We will do that, and Paul will tell us how he's getting on. But then he will also take us through the first of those fights, which is really a marquee fight, British interest in the title fight as well. Paul, how are you, sir? And please take us through that first fight.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Great to be back another week. Highlight of the week for me. No matter what I'm doing, it's always the highlight of the week. Sitting down, speaking to you about the upcoming fights, and yeah, you're right. This week we've got, well, if you call it two world title fights, we'll come to that in a minute. As well as another kind of hot prospect, in action too. But without further ado, there's nowhere else to start really, and in, as you said, America, and we're at the Fire Lake Arena in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Main event: George Kambosos Jr. against Maxi Hughes for the IBO lightweight title. So look at these, quick tail of the tape, as we always like to do. You both big names, I suppose, but yeah, George Kambosos is 20-2 with 10 stoppages. 30 years old, from Australia. Orthodox fighter, stands at 5'9" and has a 68-inch reach. Obviously, his two losses on his record came back to back to Devin Haney, for undisputed status at 135 pounds. Failing to win both, arguably not winning a round out of the 24. Obviously fighting Maxi Hughes, who's had a resurgence in recent years. He's 26-5 with five stoppage wins. 26-5-2. Apologies, two draws on there as well. Southpaw from Britain, of course, 33 years old. And yeah, this is a really intriguing fight for me. I don't know about you. Myself and Greg, when this fight was initially announced, we did a kind of quick reaction and early prediction video, and we had contrasting opinions on the fight. Most is obviously the former unified champion, beat Teofimo Lopez. Obviously, before that, beat Lee Selby. Maxi Hughes has beaten the likes of Kid Galahad and what was an upset win. Ryan Walsh, obviously, Giovanni Straffon, who unfortunately knocked out Belfast man James Tennyson, so that's a name on there as well. John O'Carroll, another name. And you could argue that Maxi Hughes is in the form of his life right now. As we mentioned, the IBO title on the line, so whatever credibility that has, whether you determine that to be a world title or not, it's up to you. But yeah, it's a cracking fight. And my question to you, Elliot, is, when I mentioned that myself and Greg had differing opinions on this, and I wonder if you and I will as well. Do you see this as a 50-50 fight? Do you favour someone noticeably over the other? How do you kind of see this one?
You know what, Paul? I'm glad you missed. Thank you, obviously, for that very eloquent breakdown, taking us through it there as usual with your usual distinct and erudite style. We are. I did a deep breakdown of this fight with Danny and Owen, and I contrasting opinions with those two as well. But I think you and I actually might align here, which is obviously not a commonality between us. But to be honest with you, favour Kambosos in this fight. And I know that the other guys were saying that Maxi Hughes should win it. The other guys were saying that, I think Owen was saying obviously about he was suggesting that Selby had been robbed when he fought Kambosos as well. But I think I just look at the CVs and I just still think the sort of level and the talent that you've mixed it in with. Don't get me wrong, Max Hughes has obviously got some credible victories that you took us through there as well. I just can't help thinking that there's just a different level to where Kambosos has been fighting. And if you look at, like you said as well, at Maxi Hughes' record, 5 KOs in 26 victories, he's going to have to obviously outbox Kambosos, I think, for me. Do I see him doing that? I don't actually know. I think Kambosos is going to win. Obviously, he's got, like you say, 10 KOs in 20 victories as well. But I think I'm actually going to favour Kambosos on points here, to be perfectly honest with you. That's how I'm looking at it. Nothing away from Maxi Hughes, but I'm surprised at actually the amount of sentiment backing him here. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know. I haven't taken your opinion yet, but I don't know whether you agree with me or disagree with me. Let me know now.
For the shock of the viewer, mate, I completely agree with you. I think George Kambosos Jr. will win this fight as well. Greg he wasn't massive on Hughes winning the fight. He thought it was, very close fight. And I agree, it is. Maxi Hughes is in great form recently, like beating Galahad. I know Galahad stepped up two weight divisions or whatever it was. But I think, yeah, I favour Kambosos. everyone obviously says that Teofimo Lopez was maybe weight trained or whatever for that fight, underperformed when Kambosos beat him, but he still had to beat him. Look at Teofimo Lopez since then. He went on and beat Josh Taylor, who was, widely regarded as one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world, never mind just Britain. And yeah, I look at Kambosos and I think, he's fighting Devin Haney. Devin Haney, Gervonta Davis, Shakur Stevenson, they're all on a different level, in my opinion, at lightweight. Then you've got your likes of Kambosos and fighters like that. So I think that, yeah, although Maxi Hughes is enjoying, wouldn't say an Indian summer because he's only 33 still, but an incredible run. I do favour the Australian here as well, and I agree with you. I see it coming on points. Obviously, the IBO title on the line there at lightweight. The next fight, Elliot, I believe that you're going to eloquently take us through, involves another IBO world title, this time down at featherweight.
It does, Paul. It does. And I suppose viewers now are thinking I've misled them in some way by talking about world title action. But technically, you can have the IBO. I mean, Eubank Jr. obviously popularising the IBO at one point. But anyway, here we go. So I'm taking you down. That's exactly right. IBO title action at featherweight between James Jazza Dickens against Hector Sosa. Give you a quick tailor tape, Paul, like you've done obviously for the first fight, and as we always like to do. Start off with Dickens. He's 32 years old, 5'5", with a 63-inch reach. A record of 32-4, 12 KOs on that. 4 losses, having 3 KO defeats in there. Just to take you through, I suppose, his losses really. Firstly, just because obviously there's some notable ones in there. There's Kid Galahad twice, recently retired in their fight in 2021, obviously with an eye injury that he sustained during that fight and eventually retired in the 11th round. But then coming to then as a loss to Thomas Patrick Ward, who I know you, Paul, have declared as one of the most feared and avoided fighters in that division. And there's a loss there as well, obviously a head clash as well that stopped that fight. And also against Rigondo, that was back in 2016. So obviously that's really credible. He was competing for the WBA Super bantamweight title in that fight. Victories, I suppose there's victories that you know against credible victories against the likes of Ryan Walsh and world champion Lee Wood. Again, so obviously that was for the European title. So he's been sort of around sort of European level. When he stepped up to sort of world title action, has fallen just short on a couple of occasions there. So it'd be interesting to kind of see how he kind of develops and kicks on, and obviously looks to get back into that fold, especially when you consider that he has beaten Lee Wood, and Lee Wood is now world champion. Going over to Sosa, who people may or may not be familiar with. But here's a guy with a 15-2 record, 8 KOs on that victory. He's 27, so he's younger, 5'5.5", an Argentinian fighter. Now, names really on the record you might not necessarily be familiar with. But I suppose there's losses to Christian Cato and to Rafael Pedrosa. Victories, recent victory over Loreno Squito, which is 11-0, and that was over in Argentina as well. But has never fought over 12-round distance. Well, actually, that's a complete lie. He has fought over 12-round distance, but there was one fight he's had in over 12 rounds. The rest of them in 6 and 10 rounders, and the 12-round fight was actually back in 2020 for South American Super Bantamweight title. So, Paul, I suppose an experienced and I suppose potentially unknown Argentinian fighter really coming against Jazza Dickens, who you obviously are a fan of. You've mentioned that point before, and know obviously familiar with his career as well. What I want to ask you really is, well, how do you see this fight playing out, essentially, given obviously I suppose in some ways the miles on the clock, but also the age of Jazza Dickens down at that weight? Do you see this being routine for him? Do you see him being able to sort of kick on for a world title shot after this? Or do you see it being a potentially challenging encounter for him over there?
Yeah, thanks for that, Elliot. Wonderful breakdown as always. I think that Jazza Dickens, you look at that and he's beaten Lee Wood, who many would regard as one of the best featherweights on the planet now. Yeah, that was a couple of years ago now, a few years ago, but he still has that win on his resume. I think that last time out when he won the IBO belt, Jazza Dickens, it was a super close fight, and a lot of people think he got a little bit of a homer decision in Liverpool. It was a close fight, kind of nip and tuck, but he ended up obviously getting the decision. I look at this man Sosa, and I think 15-2 looks decent enough. But at what level is that? And the 2 times that he has kind of stepped up, as you mentioned, against Pedrosa and Cardo, he has been defeated, and I expect that to happen again. I don't think Jazza Dickens is a huge puncher. I expect this to go the distance, but I think Jazza Dickens will make a successful first defence of his IBU title. Yeah, over 12 rounds. See this go on the full 36 minutes. I don't think he'll win every round, Dickens. I maybe see Sosa winning, give him 3 or 4, but I reckon at the end of the fight, it'll be, a kind of comprehensive victory for Jazza Dickens against a fighter who I don't think is potentially as good as his record suggests.
Well, we are 2 for 2, and we are heading now into our third fight, which, as you said, which you accurately said, obviously in the introduction, there is a hot prospect in action on the undercard of the Kambosos Hughes fight. Please, Paul, would you take us through that now?
Yeah, as you mentioned, one of the hottest prospects in world boxing. Keaton Davis, we're of course talking about. He's on the undercard here in Oklahoma, and he's fighting a familiar name to some, Francesco Patera. Keyshawn Davis is only 8-0, but with 6 stoppages. 24 years old, obviously from America, orthodox fighter. Stands at 5'9" and has a 70-inch reach. Patera is 28-3 with 10 stoppages. He's 30 years old from Belgium. Stands at half an inch taller at 5'9.5", and is of course the former European lightweight champion. We mentioned Patera. I'll go through his kind of record first. Might be familiar name because he beat Lewis Ritson on his travels to the UK before. He also has a good win over Samuel Molina. And he's also, when you look at fighters he lost to a Briton, Sean Dodd, lost to Edis Tati and Ivan Mendy. So there's 3 defeats, never been stopped. And then you look at Keyshawn Davis, and yeah, kind of needs no introduction, as you said. Unbelievable amateur. Now in the pro ranks and kind of moving at a quick enough pace, pretty quick pace. Obviously beat Anthony Ugit last time out by a 9th round stoppage, which was kind of a big step up at the time, and a statement win, I think. And this is another decent opponent for Keyshawn Davis. I think, in my opinion, I think Patera is, shown he is that European level at lightweight. And for just your 9th fight, I think this is definitely a credible opponent for Keyshawn Davis. My question for you, well, I've kind of got two actually. Elliot, obviously, first and foremost, how do you see this fight going? Do you see it being a statement? Obviously, Patera's never been stopped. Could you potentially see Davis being the first man to stop him? Kind of your prediction on the fight. And then, second off, if you want to tell me yes or no, do you think that Keyshawn Davis will be a world champion in the next 18 months to 2 years, considering the names that we have at lightweight already?
Oh, that's a body shot. That well, that's shot the wind out of me. That one. That's a challenging one. But I think let me take your first question first. I think to be perfectly honest with you, I actually think he will stop him. I think Keyshawn Davis will be the first one to stop him. Obviously, saw the fight with Anthony Ugit, and you look at like who he's fought as well, and names he's been in with. Obviously, like Baranchik and Rolly Romero. Obviously lost those fights by stoppage as well, but that was a credible step up. And I look at this and I think, like you say, the Ritson fight is the one that obviously I remember. But yeah, I think it'll be a stoppage. Yeah, I think he'll have enough to stop him. Whether it comes to Keyshawn Davis in the next 2 years being a champion in that division, I mean, Paul, that's a stacked division, isn't it? As well, like, do I think 2 years maybe? Probably say no, if I'm honest with you, over that time period, depending on, I suppose, who moves up from that division and who kind of stays around. Obviously, you've got some guys that I'm talking primarily lightweight here, to be perfectly honest with you, but we're looking at guys that might move up. So I expect Haney probably will move up in that time. Then you've got the likes of Stevenson maybe kicking around, obviously, as well. He's not going to beat him. Then you've got names like Tank Davis. What does he do? Lomachenko's obviously obviously aging. So there's obviously a chance that he actually might, I suppose, be out of the scene by that point. But not in the next 2 years, frankly. I don't see Keyshawn Davis winning title in the next 2 years. I think I can almost see him sort of accelerating maybe through to a certain level, going sort of like over 2 years, we say he fights 2 times a year, maybe sort of 11, 12, 13-0 max. And then you're sort of sitting there going, shit, who do we match him with now? That's kind of how I see it playing out. I'm not convinced he'll win a belt necessarily unless the other guys potentially move up. But that said, there's obviously some great fights, some exciting fights down there. And obviously, like you say, he's a credible and fantastic prospect.
Yeah, definitely a fantastic prospect. I agree with your fight prediction. I think he could be the first man to stop Francesco Patera. I think he's an incredible fighter, and he's shown the levels he has to his game. That's an emphatic knockout victory, really. Went through the gears and stopped him near the end of the fight in the 9th. I think we could maybe see something similar here, mid to late rounds. I don't think it'll be a blowout early, but I could see a stoppage here, most definitely. And then, yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying in the sense that it'll be difficult with the names at lightweight, but I suppose it all depends on whether those belts become fragmented. If Haney wins his next fight and then moves up and there's 4 belts are all out, could he fight for a vacant title? I suppose it's all if buts and maybes. We don't know for sure, but yeah, definitely a hot prospect. And if you haven't watched Keyshawn Davis already, get to know him because he's got a bright future.
No, I totally agree, Paul. And I think obviously with that, that brings us to the end of this week's preview. But as we mentioned in that video, really, we've got a deep fight breakdown coming for the Hughes and Kambosos fight. Obviously, as we always say every week, let us know whether you agree with this or disagree with us in the comments. Paul, you've got the betting show coming up as well, and I assume I'm not going to put words into your mouth here, but I think if you were looking for a sort of triple bet, you'd obviously have Jazza maybe on points, Davis KO, and then go whichever way you want on the main event. But yeah, obviously it's contentious, it's split opinion. We'll have other content coming up, written and video, based on that fight, reviews, previews, written and, as I said, and video based. But Paul, the last thing for me to say to you really is, again, highlight of my week as well. Thank you very much for joining us. And again, thank you very much, guys, for watching.